and then you're standing in the mall from open all the way to close with barely any breaks, right? And that was actually like when I was like really in the thick of it, that was something I took pride in, was the fact that I was able to stand for, so many hours and like not take a break. And then other people who were newer were like taking breaks all the time because you get like kind of hooked on this idea of like, oh, I can do this because I'm like strong.
Eli, you worked for a Credico affiliate out of Chicago, and you've had about 6 months to reflect on your time there since you quit. So looking back now, what does that experience mean to you? What do you think about when you think of Credico?
When I think back on the experience, the first thing that comes to mind is how, I was kind of naively trusting and just kind of fell immediately hook, line, and sinker for a lot of the things they tell you up front. Because it took me like a minute to realize how every single thing that they were telling me was like actually a lie, and because I was like, I'm kind of innately a pretty trusting person just from the get-go. So when I actually did end up like discovering all of that, I didn't even like really believe it all at first, to be honest, when somebody actually did confront me with the information that was the truth. And like, I think I probably would have stayed in it for quite a while, honestly, because everybody around me, certainly at first glance, like seemed to be successful and everything like that. But everything's not really what it seems, of course.
Sure. When you mean at first glance seem to be successful, what are you talking about exactly?
Yeah, so I was working in the office of somebody who's at the regional consultant level.
Okay.
And he had a lot of different offices opened there as well. So it was like we were working in a building that was essentially like 5 or 6 offices were sharing the same building and everything like that. And so when I mean at first glance, they seemed to be successful. They had a lot of status symbols, right? Like everybody who had the ownership level, was wearing like a Rolex watch, for example. And, they would be sharing all these stories all the time of like, oh, so-and-so, just bought like a new BMW, quote unquote, with the money from their bank account, right? And so you see all of these, all sometimes firsthand in person, like, somebody's wearing a Rolex or like a super nice suit or something like that. And it kind of helps for them to sell you on the idea they're pitching.
Yeah. So is it that they're not that successful? Is it a put on based on what you saw?
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, it's not really like possible for me to know 100% for sure without like having access to like everybody's pay stubs and all kinds of information,
right,
that I don't have access to, of course. But definitely when they're talking about like, oh, you spend this much time at this level and then you get to X level and X level, and then when you're a junior executive, you're making like 75K a year or whatever. That definitely does not seem true to me, because we did have instances where the person who was training me was at that level, at like junior executive and everything like that, and they start to like expect expect him to like start buying lunch for all the people that he's training, and pay for transportation and everything.
Mhm.
And it got to the point where sometimes he would be like, oh, man, I'm just like spending way too much money on Uber or something like that, essentially. And like I understand that like Uber is not like super cheap or anything like that, but if you're making like between 75 to $100,000 a year, it's like an Uber here and there is not really going to be crippling you, I would surmise, financially. And so just like there was a lot of different things that happened like that where it was uh it kind of made me realize that, oh, it was more of like a shiny veneer on everything as opposed to uh the way it actually was. Like it wasn't the same kind of success that they were pitching.
And yeah, I would think if you're making 75,000 a year at minimum, right? Because they always say
Yeah,
75 and up, usually six figures. Number one, I wouldn't think that buying a few dinners for some of your leaders would be a big deal. One. Number
right.
two, like you said too, Uber's not cheap, but here and there, not a big deal. But for me, the big thing is, why even taking an Uber? If you're making six figures, where's your car?
That's that. Yeah,
If I'm making six figures, then I have a car that I'll use daily, and then I have
yeah,
another car to use to show off, right?
right. You
Because
have your
that's the
fancy car,
lifestyle.
right?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
lifestyle they always advertise. So where is it? Right? I mean, we've heard a
Well, and
lot
that
of
was
people talk about these regional consultants, national consultants who are, they have the cars and whatnot. But I mean, you've either been in it since the beginning, so you've been in it for 15, 20 years. So by now, I'd hope you'd be able to afford something like that, or it gets bought for them just to keep up appearances.
right. And the other thing, speaking of it like not being of it seeming initially like a lot of success and then just seeing like a lot of little things that added up to, I don't actually think this is what it's cracked out to be, is
Mhm.
my team, the leader of my team and everything, the same person who was like complaining about like having to buy Ubers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
He would have people who were getting on our crew, like over to his place like every once in a while. And so at first I was like, oh man, I wonder what kind of apartment is like this guy renting. And it's like the smallest, dingiest studio I've ever seen in my life. Uh, you know, which is like at first this happened like really early on in my tenure with Credico. So at first I was like, oh, this guy just likes to live really frugal, like I can respect that. But then as I started to notice the other things, I kind of put more of the whole picture together.
Yeah. So you said that you bought in pretty easily, and in your message, you use the very common culty phrase "drank the Kool-Aid." What about this appealed to you?
Well, so I guess what appealed to me, like I definitely saw like some of the red flags like coming into it that I just kind of willfully willfully ignored for some reasons we'll get into in a second.
Mhm.
Like I noticed like, oh, the website had like some spelling mistakes on it, like all the kind of classic stuff that you would expect, right?
Mhm.
um the name of the company at the time I applied to it was a misspelling of the word camaraderie, where they used, instead of IE at the end, they used a Y. So there was like definitely a couple things where I was thinking in the back of my head, I was like, I'm cautious about this, right? But
Mhm.
at the time that I ended up applying for it, I had been in kind of the sector of the economy where you're hustling like multiple side jobs at the time, and I kind of made the decision of like, okay, I need to stop like doing all of these different side gigs and just like commit to something that's going to be like full-time work essentially. And
Mhm.
so in the process of doing that, I kind of became honestly just like desperate to find something that was better than what I was currently doing.
Yep.
So because of that, um, even though I did notice some of the first upfront red flags, I was just so sick and tired of, being paid dirt for what I was doing previously.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, let's just give this a shot. And, I'm not going to be like married to it or anything. And, it's not like forever. Right. So,
Right.
and that's how I got into it. And um, it was kind of interesting because I went through like a lot of trouble, like providing references on my resume and contacting all of my references and making sure we were all good to go on that front. And after I got the job, I wanted to call my references and ask like, oh yeah, did they reach out ever? And like, they didn't contact any of my references at all, which I thought was really weird at the time. But I was like, well, okay, I've got the job, like great. So there was definitely like a lot of red flags up front that just out of like desperation to have like a real adult career, I kind of, ignored leading into it. And then they just kind of launch you into the whole process and it just kind of sweeps you from there,
That's a really good red flag that I know we haven't heard before in these videos, but yeah, you would think that for applying for the job, you would want to have references. So you would think that they would request them. But yeah, following up with them afterwards is a great idea, because if they don't contact these people, but they give you the spiel about, we want you and all these types of things, they really make it sound like they're vying for you, and they only have a certain number of positions to fill according to them, which is a lie. But you would think that, well, like, why wouldn't you reach out to references? That's a really good point. And you were collecting, so you were actually, your branch of Credico, I know Credico does all these different things, and you were one of these charity collectors, which we've heard from a good number of people in this series. And it's so depressing to hear that so many of these Credico offices are these charity donations, because we know that the money doesn't go to these charities. So I'm really curious, what did you ever have questions about whether the money was actually going to these places? Was that ever a topic of conversation in the office or any of that?
Yeah, that was also on the bridging the gap kind of from what we were talking about a little bit earlier. That was also what kind of made me overlook some of the, immediate red flags. Is I was like, oh, well, this is all for a good cause. So, if what I'm doing is going to help out like an organization like, the Humane Society or Doctors Without Borders or whatever it is, like that's great. And it really makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside when you're asked to put up with all the crazy, inhumane working conditions that they put you through.
Yeah.
Right. And so, there was like, I didn't really start per se questioning like where the money was actually going at first, because we did have some like regular Zoom meetings and some different things that they said were, I'm not 100% sure if these actually were with people from the organizations. At this point, I'm not sure if anything they ever said was true. But they would have like in some of the morning meetings, it'd be like, oh, we have so and so, like a representative from Doctors Without Borders who's here to talk about their mission and talk about like terminology and different kind of things that they wanted us to incorporate into the pitch. I'm not 100% sure if that was faked or not. If it was faked, it would be pretty elaborate to do something like that. So I'm not 100% sure. It certainly seemed like maybe it actually was somebody from the organization, even if they were only getting like a small portion of what we were collecting out there. Because when I did start to question like what was actually going on here, like how, because all the numbers just sounded way too good to be true, right? It's like, oh, you get somebody to sign up for a $25 a month donation, but then like the they don't actually start, I guess they don't actually start making money off of that until way down the line. So that's why you have to have quality donors that keep on donating, all of that stuff. They had like a spreadsheet that you would keep track of your donors in, and the amount donated and confirmation code, all that kind of stuff. And next to, as they went to do like the paychecks each week, you would notice that next on the right side, as they were going through, they would add these like mysterious unlabeled numbers off to the side of like whatever donation amount you had. So it would be different if you had like, oh, $50 a month, or if you had the, 125 quarterly or whatever option. There'd be some amounts out there. And I actually did run the math when I started to be more suspicious about what was actually going on with the money. And it worked out to kind of perfectly corroborate what you can read on like Devilcorp and other websites where they talk about the charity collection schemes, where it's like over 90% of that money like doesn't seem to really go to the charity, because the way the numbers worked out lined up with those different reports that I saw on the internet, which was really like the biggest thing for me when I was like found that out. It's like, oh, what I'm doing isn't even going like to the cause at all. That's when I was just needed to find a way out as fast as possible, is when I kind of came to that conclusion on my own.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the reason that you're able to rationalize all the red flags and the warnings, and you figured out, well, even that's not true, there's really not much incentive to stay at that point. So it does make it a little bit easier to leave. So thankfully, that's another good example of, doing the research, digging in and trying to find out, okay, is it just a bunch of bad apples? Is it just a bunch of really angry, bitter people that are making these reviews on Glassdoor and making these videos on the Slave Circle, or is there some element of truth to it? And I think we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the truth right here. Like Credico is a shell, is a scam company, and it just doesn't work out that way. And I would probably venture a guess, going back to the rep from Doctors Without Borders, I would venture a guess it probably was a legitimate person, because a lot of these charities, they know what's going on. ASPCA knows, Humane Society of the United States knows that these third-party companies are being hired to supposedly bring in a percentage of money. But if you look back at previous videos, we've highlighted that the charities actually end up losing money by keeping these third-party companies on their payroll, which doesn't make any sense, but that's how it goes. So you were, earlier in this interview, you used the word desperate, which I've probably heard in more than half the interviews I've done. That word comes up almost every time. And that probably allowed you to accept something else you said in this interview, which, to quote you, was inhumane working conditions. Desperate times makes you accept things like that. Sleeping in a roach infested room with no mattress on the floor, living with 5 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment and thinking that's normal. So if you don't mind, what were some of those inhumane working conditions that you had to endure?
So essentially, like, similar to a lot of the other stories that people may have heard through different interviews that you've done and everything, one of the everything in the interview process is just categorically false, just to get you in the door so they can start running the systems on you and getting you like into the fold and thinking a certain way, right? So one of those lies is like, oh yeah, so the hours are going to be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? Which is like, great, that works for me. Like, that sounds like exactly what I'm working for. I'm going to work for 40 hours a week and still have a life outside of work. And that's just as far from the truth as it could possibly be, like, as we both know, right? It starts out that way. And I remember, like, quitting time like came around on the very first day, right? And the person that was training me already kind of, planted that like subconscious seed of like, oh, well, we can leave if you guys want, or we could just stay and get one more, right? And that was kind of like the first instance of where they started stretching that boundary. And stuff like that keeps happening, right? I kind of like to compare it to when the allegory of how you boil a frog slowly in water
Yes,
so it doesn't realize it's boiling.
exactly.
Yeah, so stuff like that keeps happening, and they keep incrementally increasing the amount of hours per day and per week you're working until it's like, oh, you've been you almost made the goals this week. We're about to promote you to leadership, but you really need to show me that you really want it. So we need you to come in on Sunday, on a day where it's normally like for sure this is your day off up until this point, right? And then now you come in on Sunday because you're hungry for that promotion because you've seen a few of the other speeches and everything, and you feel the energy in the room, and you're wild up, and you want to be up there, using all the Pavlovian responses to control everybody in the room, right? You like get that sense, you want a taste of that power. So you go through it. Now you're coming in on Sunday, and you get promoted to leadership. Now you have to come in like an hour and a half earlier for the leadership meetings before anything else, right? And then you end up staying all the way until the mall closes, because I guess they just do it kind of outdoors in the summer here. But when I was there, like through the winter and everything, they did it in the malls and everything. So you're basically there. I got to the office at like 7:25, 7:30 in the morning to find free parking because there was an extremely limited amount of free parking in downtown Chicago. The office is in River North, so good luck not paying for parking. And it's like if you don't get there that early, you're going to be paying like upwards of like $10,
Yeah.
$15 a day on street
Astronomical.
parking, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, and that's like, you can rent a spot in a lot or something like that, but it was like that's going to destroy the really small amount of income I'm even making from this in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So the only logical thing for me to do was to extend the hours I was working there even more and start coming in at like 7:25, 7:30 in the morning to get like a free spot every single time. And then you're from that point all the way until when whatever mall you're going to opens, right? And then you're standing in the mall from open all the way to close with barely any breaks, right? And that was actually like when I was like really in the thick of it, that was something I took pride in, was the fact that I was able to stand for, so many hours and like not take a break. And then other people who were newer were like taking breaks all the time, because you get like kind of hooked on this idea of like, oh, I can do this because I'm like strong, even though it's just like absolutely crazy. So you end up leaving the mall at like 9 p.m. or something, and I had a car, so I was constantly like, driving everybody home and everything like that. I would like drive everybody home, drop them off, make sure they were all good to go, and then I would get home at maybe like 10:30, 10:45 at night. Uh, kind of just take a shower, go to sleep immediately, and then wake up and do it again the next day. So there was like literally at the height of it, like not a single minute outside of work, more or less. And that was before I even got to the point where they start, doing the calls at night to, connect you with people, the networking calls and everything. I hadn't even really got to the point where they started doing that yet. They wanted to.
Yeah.
So that would have been even more. It's like my time commuting, I wouldn't have been able to listen to music or anything at that point because I would have been doing the networking calls. So I guess like that kind of sums up like in more detail what I mean when I said it was inhumane working conditions.
Yeah. So just doing some quick math here. So let's say you get to the office at 7:30. work the full day, get home about 10:45. So we're talking right there. That's a 15-hour work day at minimum. Like you said, let's just say you jump in the shower right away, 15-minute shower. We're at 11 p.m. I don't see any time for like eating dinner. I don't see any time
Yeah.
for going to the gym. I don't see any time for socializing in any meaningful way with anybody. Because let's say you go to sleep at 11:30, that gives you 8 hours from 11:30 is 7:30, and you
Yeah.
already have to be at the office. So that guarantees you're not going to get an 8-hour night of sleep. Maybe you could push it to 7, but even then, it's either sleep or have something to do with going to the office or going to the mall or spending all day there, or the most basic of basic human needs, showering, sometimes not even eating. And that's life in Credico. So that illusion, I don't even know where they even get off advertising Monday, Friday, 9 to 5, because that's a 40-hour work week. And to these people, 40-hour work weeks are like the spawn of Satan. Like you are not applying yourself at all in a 40-hour work week. So if you're doing 15 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 75 hours right there. And we're not even counting going in on a Sunday. Let's add 15 more. You're working a 90-hour work week. 90-hour work week. And I'm assuming right now, but I'm probably pretty sure I'm correct. You were working a 90-hour work week and you were not making any type of overtime.
No.
And you probably weren't even making minimum wage, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you calculate it out as like, dollars per hour of time spent, it's like not even remotely in the ballpark of minimum wage for sure.
You were only in there for a couple months, but did you have any did you network with any higher ups, like any national consultants, or were any of these people advertised to you like, sit down and take notes or listen intently to these people?
Yeah, Justin Cobb, of course. Yeah. I I remember when I was first told about Justin Cobb, the leader of my crew, one of the things that they do to get you to like commit, of course, is they give you the FOMO, right? They give you the fear of missing out. It's like, oh, sorry, we have these conference calls that we're on, but you're not a leader, so you can't be in on it.
Right.
They'll just right. So that happened a couple times and I was like, dang, like I wonder what's like going on in these. And then we had a conference call with Justin Cobb, and it like he basically was like, oh, I know you're not promoted yet, right? And I know you're not a leader or anything, but I'm gonna let you in on something really special. And he just like handed me one of his earbuds, and then I got to hear like Justin Cobb going on his spiel, right? And I don't remember like all the specifics because it was like several months ago at this point, but what I do remember of it is he was saying like, oh yeah, all of you have it way easier than we ever had it. Like us that are like really higher up, we just kind of blazed the trail for you and gave you this amazing path to success. And it's never been easier to succeed in our business. All you have to do is apply yourself, like using all of the motivational speaking tropes that you might expect and things like that. And I really believed it because they would tell you numbers like, when I forget the exact number, but he gave some kind of statistic of like, oh, our business has seen like 147% growth like this year, like just some absolutely ludicrous number, right? Which like if you know anything about like how much growth you should expect to see in a business over a yearly period, it's like absolutely insane, right? Yeah. But at the time I was gullible enough, right? And like the systems were working on me enough to where I actually like believed him when he said that. Mm-hmm. And I even had like a conversation I even had like a conversation with my dad about that earlier, where I was like, man, this like I can't believe like I ended up in this opportunity. He said that the business has seen 147% growth or whatever the number was, right? And he's
Mhm.
like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, yeah, and you know, because they give you like all of these things um to try and convince you like as deeply as possible that you're not going to find any kind of better opportunity anywhere else. And that was one example of that, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, these Credico higher ups are some of the worst people, some of the worst people that I've ever heard about. And you know, we they don't like when we talk about them. They don't like when they especially don't like when we include the Devilcorp photos of them, because they have devil horns and are in fire. And I would think evil people would be fine with that. But let's just really quick run off the names of some of these higher ups here. Of course, Justin Cobb, Antoine Nora, Josh Cody, Ian Atwood, Jesse Young, Jenny Hartley. She now goes by Jenny Linney. Tom Harris, Debbie Shaw, trying to stir up some action. You know, these people, and we're going to include a link to Credico's website in this video where you can see the actual faces of these people. They do not perceive, I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know who they are. I don't know them that well, but I would think some of them don't perceive what they do as a scam that destroys lives. Some of them have to know that it is, and they're fine with that. As long as they're making money off the backs of others, they're fine with that. And Justin Cobb is a great example of that. And you mentioned in your email one of the strategies that they use, and this was kind of the beginning of your end time here, was that they intentionally separated, or at least seemed to separate you from another rep, another team leader, that you feel like it was because they perceived you to kind of be both too intelligent for your own good, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so what happened was um this other rep, right, they had come on, I think it was, I forget if it was 1 or 2 weeks before I had come on, right? So they were marginally further ahead in the entire process that
Mm-hmm.
I was. And so uh they were on the same crew as I was. We had the same leader that led our crew and everything. And when I came in, it was essentially me and this other person were spending like all of our training time together, where we were doing like the first hours and everything, like pre-leadership
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And so there there came a point where when they were assigning who was going to go where, for a really long time it was like, oh, well, me and this other person are always basically going to get put in the same place every single time. It was like clockwork. And then all of a sudden, uh one day, after this person had like, we had started to grow closer, and they kind of expressed to me that their parents were just not very fond of this business, is more or less what they said, right? And I was like, oh, like, why? You know, like I didn't understand anything about like the true nature of what was going on at that point, so I was like curious about that. I was like, oh, like, what's the like, why not? Like, it seems like such a great thing to me, was kind of my attitude at that point. And then immediately as soon as that happened, like I just never saw them again. Like we were never like placed together again after that. And it like, I didn't like think anything of it as with first. It's like, oh, I'm not placed with them today. Well, you know, I'll get a chance to like talk to them at some point. Like we've
Mm-hmm.
been standing in the mall together for, you know, over 10 hours a day, every
Yeah.
day for like weeks at this point. So I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to follow up about that. And then we never got placed together ever again after that point. And then the the time I actually did get to follow up with them about what about what they like meant by that was like kind of a moment where we both kind of snapped out of it like right away, because I ended up giving them a ride home completely by accident, like not by the designs
Mm-hmm.
of our owner or anything like that. We were supposed to be completely separate again on this day. But it just so turned out that for some reason the owner had sent a bunch of people who don't own a car on like this crazy Uber ride from River North, like down to the south side to Chicago Ridge Mall, which I don't even know like how many miles it is, but it had to be like an exorbitantly expensive Uber to go that far, essentially. And I basically just got asked, like, because the other person they were with like lived in that part of town, so they were just going to catch a ride home, and they're like, oh, they messaged me on WhatsApp, right? And they basically said, oh, hey, can you give so and so a ride home? You know, it's like I just live down the street, but they live all the way up kind of like there where you live, and you're headed that way anyways. And I was like, oh, sure. So that's how I ended up like coming in contact with them in kind of a situation where we could talk about this stuff for the first time in weeks. And furthermore, even more dumb luck out of all of this, that how this situation happened was I was dropping a bunch of other people off that I was already, you know, were already in my car ride for that time. So it just so happened that the travel math worked out to where I dropped off this person last, and it was just me
Nice.
and them in the car. And that's how, and then that's when I asked them, I was like, hey, so like, what did you mean the other day? Like when you said this? And then that's when uh, they kind of didn't want to tell me at first, because they were like, they were still kind of in on it. It's like, I don't know. It's like, it's just too, it's like really, really crazy. Like, are you sure you want to hear it? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, yeah. And then we kind of figured it out from there, because this person's parents, I don't know how they exactly came across, like, you know, Devil Corp and the other resources that are out there that people often get exposed to, but they had exposed them to it, and they had read it, but they didn't really believe it at 1st. And then they were like, well, you know, I can share all this stuff with you if you want. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I think we ended up talking about all of this and reading through it in the car until something like 3 a.m. or something
Wow.
absolutely ridiculous, because I was like, wait, this just doesn't make sense. Because like, why would the charities, my big thing was like, why would the charities work with this despicable company, right? And as we like kept going down it, we just kind of found the answers to these questions one by one. Because at first I was in complete disbelief as well. I was like, there's no way like that
Yeah.
this is what's actually happening, right? But over a really long process of just kind of working it out together, we came to the complete conclusion. Because another reason they were bringing it up is they were supposed to get flown out with the leader of our office, who was a regional consultant, by the way. Like, I'm sure many people in Chicago who have been through the Credico thing know of him. It's Michael Wang, was the regional consultant. He scheduled a one-on-one flight to Doctors Without Borders US headquarters just with him and this other person to try and like, you know, get some like one-on-one time with them and try and resell them into the idea, is my assumption anyways. And they were extremely nervous about that because they were like starting to figure it out, right? And they're like, man, I really just don't want to, I don't want to like get on a plane with this guy and fly to New York for something like, they were going to be there for like 6 or 8 hours and then fly back.
Oh,
It was like what was going
jeez.
on. And I was like, and then that's kind of like what prompted the whole deep dive discussion. I was like, well, like, why not? Like, what's going on, you know?
So you have a very interesting story of how you ended up leaving. You pretty much just, you were lucky. You were able to just kind of sever Credico out of your life. How did you end up leaving?
So at first, in that after that extremely late uh conversation, basically we kind of came to the decision where I was telling them, I was like, you know, just tell them that you have COVID, right? Now you can't go on the plane. Doctors Without Borders isn't going to want you to come into their headquarters like infected with COVID, right?
Sure.
And that's like just the perfect excuse to get you out of this and like buy you some more time. And this was like the last week that I was at Credico is when this started happening. And um, essentially what happened was is I was like, yeah, all of this is crazy. Like the Devilcorp website is using all of the slang and lingo that they teach you here. You know, like it says juice on there. All of it's there, right? And I was like, still had like a tiny grain in me that like wanted to doubt it, right? After all of this.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to like see it with my own eyes, right? And so I did something that like at the moment I kind of thought was subtle, but turned out to be like kind of like smashing the teacup with a jackhammer, more or less. I like thought I was being like really clever, but I was like trying to do something that intentionally would kind of set them off and try and figure out what I knew that I wasn't supposed to know, right? So what I did is I sent to the leader of my crew. I sent him like a message on Snapchat because they have you do this is something that is well known, but I forgot to mention because it's just like it was just something that we did all the time is they have you sending the 5 questions every single night. So on top of, you know, the 15-16 hour workday, every day you're supposed to compose 5 questions about your day to show that you're like being inquisitive and are really trying to reflect and improve. Right. So as part of those questions, I did kind of 4 like usual ones that were ones that I would normally write. And then I put like a secret plant one in there that I was like, if there's something really weird going on here, this is gonna like set them off and their behavior is gonna change immediately. And I believe I forget exactly how I worded it, but I was something like, oh, you know, what would you do in a situation where like another leader tells you something, but then you can't seem to get any straight answers from anybody you talk to about what was going on, or something like that. I forget
Yeah.
exactly how I worded it, right? But it was really, really late, like, you know, 3 something in the morning. And I remember my crew leader immediately, like less than 5 minutes after I sent it, was like, hey, so what did question number 3 or whatever it was, what do you mean by that? I was like, oh, oh, like I've got them, basically. It was like kind of what I was thinking. And this kind of began a process where for the last couple of days I was there, they started to like isolate me, not just from this other person, because, you know, they had COVID, right? So there was you know, they weren't in the office anyways, but they started to isolate me from everybody who was new and was coming in. And I was only with people who were like way farther up the ladder than I was for like the remainder of my time there. And I had like all of a sudden I was having like multiple one-on-one meetings. I saw somebody who had been with me recently that was higher up, like behind closed doors, kind of getting like yelled at and like grilled to try and figure out what it was I was talking about, even though I completely like fabricated the whole thing, right? And yeah, it was it like the immediate shift in behavior was like so clear to me. I was like, there can't be like this kind of like validates like everything that I'd read about these places, and it kind of sealed the deal for me. And then I made up some excuse. I forget what it was. I think it was like, oh, my cat had to go to the hospital or something like that. I made up some excuse that like nobody with an ounce of empathy in their body could could ignore, right? And then I just kind of stopped showing up from that point. During the months I was there in Thanksgiving, right?
Mhm.
And so, you know, I didn't realize that like everything was kind of up. That was everything was kind of on a script at this point. And one of my regional consultant that ran, I was in his personal office, Michael. He he came up and he gave this like heartwarming speech about like Thanksgiving, right? And he talked about like his first Thanksgiving and his like second Thanksgiving with working with the company and his third, right? And it was this like really uplifting story about like, oh, during my first Thanksgiving, my family just wasn't really in approval of what I was doing, yeah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just like kept going for it and kept persevering because I knew that if I just applied myself, I could be successful at this. And then the second Thanksgiving comes along and it's like, oh, they didn't even invite me back, basically. But then in the third Thanksgiving, like he's now like an owner and he has, all the success he can dream of, and they were all wrong and everything like that, right? And at the time, that was like another thing that really like brought me into this because if you don't know Michael, like he's an extremely young guy. Like he's a lot younger. Like I'm young, right? I'm 28, right? And he's like way younger than me. He's like 22, 23. Like I think at one point, who knows if this is, maybe it probably is true because he's so young, but I don't know. He said he was like the youngest regional consultant ever. And so another thing on the coattails of that I want to make sure to mention that kind of sucked me into the entire process is that everybody around me that was in the other offices that were not Michael's office, when you were talking to them, they're constantly like, oh my God, you're in Michael's office? Like, oh, he's the regional consultant. Like they made it seem like, they have this great opportunity, but you have like an even better opportunity because of what office you're in, because you're in the regional consultant's office, right? So yeah, and there was multiple speeches that, in retrospect, like I definitely like see through it now and see the different steps and how it was like scripted to try and like help you buy into what was happening, right? But they sell it as like as if he's like speaking from personal experience like throughout this whole thing, but that's, at least to like now that I like have had a chance to like reflect on it a lot, that doesn't seem like the case to me at all. It's like I don't know if he even like lived any of these experiences that he was talking about in these speeches he would give in the mornings,
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you, this is the first time I've ever heard this guy's name. So if he is some type of Credico celebrity, he must not be a very big Credico celebrity because I never heard of this guy's name before. So sorry, Michael. Maybe you're not as big a success as you think you might be, because the people that actually pay attention to this stuff, we don't know who you are. That's unfortunate. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me because you're so impressionable. I don't know anything about this guy, his background or whatever, but I mean, if he's a driven individual, this is his first real gig and he's actually been successful at it. Yeah, it's very appealing. I feel like at some point, this could end for him one of two ways. One is that he's just blinders are fully on and he's going to try to become a Justin Cobb or Josh Cody or any of these scam artists, or something really bad is going to happen to him at some point, and he's going to have this moment where he's like, man, I just wasted all these years doing this, and now I basically have to restart again from square one. So
yeah,
I don't know.
He told me he'd been doing it for 5 years in the interview when I asked him how long he'd been with the company.
So that would mean like 18.
Yeah, I think what that means to me is I think he like got it as maybe his like first job out of high school. I don't know his life story or anything, but
yeah,
he's been basically like submerged in all of it throughout like his entire early adult life, right? So when you meet the guy, he was on the cover of the the Devilcorp magazine, right? One time,
the
right? So you can
Devilcorp
like
magazine.
yes, you can find like a picture of him if you look for it. It's on their Instagram page too. But when you see the guy, he like has all of his hair slicked back and he's wearing this extremely expensive suit. and he just gives you this like Wolf of Wall Street kind of vibe, right? Like when you
Yep.
see him. And I think it's just because like for like a lot of formative years, he's just been like submerged in
Mhm.
this entire culture in the Credico system and everything, that he's just kind of like become like the physical manifestation of that.
Yeah. The physical manifestation of Credico.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
maybe he's just a big fan of Leo DiCaprio. Maybe he just really likes The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But I mean, that's another thing that I've been hearing a lot about lately is this obsession with either the film or just the image and the perceived level of success that people like that can reach. But
yeah,
those, I mean, those flames are fanned so repeatedly and consistently in Credico that it makes sense that all of these big shots, right, these upper management types, they kind of follow the same scheme with the same attitude, because that's literally, if you admire the ideals of the Wolf of Wall Street or whatever the film personifies, and you find a business that is essentially the exact same thing, or at least they're trying to be, right? Because we know that
right.
there's no success in this, but then it's very intoxicating. It's almost life
Yeah,
affirming.
yeah, and it was intoxicating for me too, because I started to earn the respect, I guess, of Michael, to the point where he would like make sure I was put with like a lot of the new people who were coming in,
Mm.
because they wanted me to like set an example for them, right? Because I was so like neck deep in the Kool-Aid at that point. Like it would take a lot to wake me up, which I eventually did, right? But
Yeah.
that's why it was extra jarring after I sent my little bait message, how it was like instantly I'm not around anybody who's like newer on the block. It's like
Mhm.
only like junior executives and up, essentially, from
Yeah.
that point.
Mhm.
Um, it was like a very like instantaneous kind of change.
Yeah, you were no longer behaving in the way that you are programmed to.
Yeah,
You had a feeling, you had a thought, and that's not acceptable. And they tried like heck to try to mold you back, but by then, thankfully, you had seen the truth.